We all like indie games. We played the Hollow Knights, the Shovel Knights, the Five Nights, but these are just the ones that break into the mainstream. What about the ones that are ignored? Hidden gems, neat ideas with poor execution. Not every indie game is gonna be good, but so long as the devs are trying, I can usually find some fun with their game. This series will be more of an exploration of small indie games as opposed to a list of recommendations. But before we start our journey, let's go over some quick ground rules. Number 1, I will only choose games I'm interested in. I don't intend to pick a game just to make fun of it, so this is how I filter things. I'll give my reason for picking each game when I talk about it. Number 2, I will always include at least one strong recommendation. This is my attempt at giving you some guaranteed value. And number 3, these won't all be reviews. What I'll talk about is entirely dependent on the game. If I just want to talk about themes, that's all I'll cover. If I want to talk about a single mechanic, then so be it. Again, this is an indie expedition. The point is discovery. Well, that's enough preamble. Let's get started, shall we? So I picked Power of 10 because it's a twin-stick shooter, and for some reason I cannot get enough of these. In the universe of Power of 10, every single planet in this system forgot to pay their electricity bill, and they can't power their planetary defense satellites. Which sucks for them, because there are ships that are shaped like the devil constantly flying in to murder everyone. That's where you come in. As the only person in the universe who cares enough to actually try to save people, you try to save people. The gameplay follows a pretty simple loop. You enter a zone with a couple of planets to save, but you need to gather materials before you can power their defenses. So you go mine, make trades, or kill bad guys. Bad guys spawn randomly at any unprotected planet and start nuking it. If you save enough people, you get to move to the next level. If too many civilians die, your character gets depression or something, and time warps back to the beginning. I actually thought this game was pretty boring the first time I played it. Look at this map, right? These green planets here are the ones you have to save, and the little yellow rings here are places you can fast travel to. The gray planets and debris are places where you can mine for materials. When you start playing, enemy spawns are very infrequent, and there aren't many enemies that initially spawn in the zone, so you spend a lot of time just flying to rocks, shooting them, flying back, bada bing, you save the world. It really feels like there's a lot of downtime, which had me snoozing. But after I came back to the game a second time and got further into it, I found that downtime to actually be very carefully considered, and I wouldn't want to play the game without it. Let me explain. Yes, the downtime makes the game start pretty slowly, but once you get to the second sector, it all makes sense. Enemy spawns become far more frequent, and the game becomes a hefty cost-benefit analysis for every action you take. The fast travel planets aren't always the ones you have to save, so you need to consider if you should rush materials to save an isolated one first in case an early invasion occurs. But if you're wrong about that planet being the one that's going to be attacked, then you're caught with your pants down and you have to scramble to save the attacked planet. But if you're lucky, you can destroy beacons at mining areas to prevent enemies from invading, so you'll have an easier time gathering. But if you can only mine in an area that's far from other planets, then getting back to protect them might be too dangerous. So maybe you should just camp out at a planet and protect it, and hope the enemies drop some resources instead. But fighting enemies for resources risks your health, and maybe the planet was already attacked once, so saving like 12 people isn't a priority over another planet that still has 50. All this starts going on in your head, and you realize that this balance of taking gambles or playing it safe is actually really engaging. And that downtime I mentioned, it serves to enhance the impact of a choice you make because it leaves you vulnerable, but also gives you a moment to de-stress and plan after you clear a zone, since you'll probably want to gather before leaving to optimize the next area. Though even that can have its risks with small enemy spawns at mining sites. The gameplay itself is pretty fun as well. Shooting is pretty punchy, and while weapons aren't super unique, there's a mixing technique that layers different weapons on top of each other, which serves as a solid replacement. The different power-ups you can collect in each run, this game's a roguelite by the way, aren't they all, aren't super unique from what I've seen, mostly stat boosts. But one cool thing is that the ammo has a set capacity, and each weapon has a specific ammo type. So since you have to shoot to kill enemies and to mine, that's another thing to consider when running certain guns. If you focus on heavy cost but strong shots exclusively, mining becomes super expensive. Again, it's another part of that cost-benefit focus that makes your choices matter. And the enemies themselves are pretty simple, but when several different enemies are on screen, it can get pretty hectic, but easily understandable. It kinda reminds me of Enter the Gungeon in that way. I know exactly what each enemy does at a glance, but now I actually have to deal with a swarm of them. Though sometimes their shots can be a bit hard to see. Like, look at this, it's just not very clear. I should probably mention this somewhere. The game crashed on me twice, but when I loaded the game back up, I didn't lose any progress, so it's whatever. All in all, I'd recommend giving this one a shot. Just keep the slow start in mind. Oh, and shout out to the creator, he actually has a demo for his game, so you can try before you buy. Mwah! Excellent! I give this game a 1.223 to the power of 10 out of 10. So, when I pick a game to play with the intention of talking about it in a video, I usually try to think through what the game might be like so I can prep my mind for writing my script. And of course, there may be certain things related to what interested me in the first place that I want to talk about. For this game, when I saw the simple sprite art and mediocre trailer that didn't know how to flaunt its gameplay, I thought this game was probably gonna be pretty bad. But I read the description of the game on the Steam page and... man, he put 2 exclamation points at the end of it, and I got the feeling that the dev probably worked really hard on it. Like, look how excited he was to release the game! 2 exclamation points! But the game only had like 3 reviews. There's this thing that happens to me where I see someone try their hardest to do something that they really care about, and they don't find much success with it, and it just crushes me to see. I don't think it's pity, it's more like empathy. I want someone who cares to succeed. So I chose this game so I could talk about chasing dreams and success. Now, I'm just a YouTuber with less than 1,000 subs, so I wasn't gonna give advice or anything, I'm not that conceited, but I wanted it to be an example of a game that, despite its flaws, is still a step forward. There's so much to learn, failures lead to growth, and indie devs are the heart of the industry. So I wanted to beg for all indie devs that despite a game being ignored when you post it, despite negative reviews, despite all the self-doubt you might feel when you look at your game and compare it to the titles that broke into the mainstream, please, please, keep making games. Of course, I would need to actually play the game so I could honestly talk about it. I didn't want to just talk around it and use it as an excuse to cover another topic, and, well, I had fun playing it, what can I say? Now, I wouldn't go so far as to claim this is a hidden gem or anything, but even though the gameplay is really simple, the ideas put forward are actually pretty engaging for what it is. You play as Ninnin, the slowest goddamn ninja in the entire world, and she has the ability to chuck kunai perfectly horizontally. She's taking out gang members who are trying to destroy the city. Now, the game has received a few updates, so I don't know what the original release was like, but the entire game is a boss rush where the goal is to land hits, which may spawn a permanent or temporary upgrade. So Ninnin goes from a weak baby to an unkillable monster. But ultimately, you really just jump and throw things, so what makes it actually fun? So the game actually takes advantage of Ninnin's simple moveset by making pretty much every basic enemy attack really dangerous. But you can work around the attack with careful positioning and some risky platforming. My favorite example is the bomb that enemies sometimes lob at Ninnin, which explodes on a timer. Dodging this can be tough because of how slowly Ninnin moves, but if you know it's coming, you can kick the bomb away to maintain your position and continue attacking. And if you're caught out in a bad spot, the maneuvering you have to do to dodge can sometimes be pretty intense. Another good example is this alligator dude. He has an unkillable gator that roams back and forth and absorbs hits. He also spawns killable gators that grow in size. This means that if you don't keep up the attack, the ground will be overrun by enemies, so you have to jump down, bait the alligator's charge, dodge it, then attack the actual target, who can still fight back. The alligator will get stunned when he hits the wall, but once it recovers, it's risky on the ground, so you have to jump to a safe place. It's all pretty simple, but since Ninnin is not very agile, it's something you actually have to think about. Jumping in at a bad time will hurt, getting greedy will backfire, poor positioning will waste your attempt. Each level has some kind of gimmick that I think works well with how Ninnin controls. And look how cute she is! When she jumps, she does a little dance! I do think the balance of the game is a bit questionable, though. Let me put it this way. If I was in a room with Hitler, Batshee, and a clone of Hitler, and I had a gun with only 2 bullets, I would shoot Batshee twice, but she would survive and chuck a grenade in my face. Of my 2-hour playthrough, 50 minutes of it was spent on Batshee. Alright, this isn't so bad. Ow! Oh, you fuck! Fucking bombs! Bastards! Get the fuck off of me! Ah! But then I got to the final boss of the area and, well, sometimes the power-ups are a bit too much, I think. All right, that one was way easier. Maybe nerf the shield a little bit. Invincibility leads to easy drop farming, which can end up spawning more shields, which means easier drop farming. But seriously, I was pleasantly surprised. I sent an email to Horpon about some bugs I found, so here's hoping they get resolved. The game reminds me of the games I used to play on Newgrounds, where someone takes a simple concept and tries to wring all the fun out of it that they can. The only difference is that this game costs $1. But if you have a buck, give it a try. Don't expect the world, but I think you'll get what I mean when I say it's pretty fun. Smushi Come Home is a baby game for babies that make boom boom in their diaper wipes. There are a lot of games that try for this kind of thing, where they try to be all easy to play and stuff, but they can't quite let go of their gamer instinct. Convention says falling should kill you. Convention says enemies should attack you. Convention says a game should get more difficult over time. But convention talks too much, and we won't be hearing from him for a long, long while. The truth is, if you want to make a cozy jaunt through a small Smushi environment, you should commit to it. And Smushi Come Home is a very honest game. I'm not a huge fan of games that give you the potential for complex gameplay, but never explore it to keep things easy for the kiddies to follow. So a game that keeps its gameplay simple to stay in line with its tone places my expectations exactly where it needs to be. Smushi can walk, jump, wall climb, float, and sprint. There is no combat, he has no enemies. Falls do not hurt, puzzles are simple, and the platforming sections can be made easier if you aren't interested in tackling the already simple challenges. I'm a gameplay-oriented gamer, so the fact that I like this game is a testament to how well they did in nailing this comfy atmosphere. Smushi is a mushroom that lives on an island with his family, but he gets yoinked by a bird and gets dropped off really far away. He's lost, but he finds some friendly critters that he can work with to find his way back home. The game's style is very cute, and the interactions were all lighthearted and focus more on being funny or charming over building a world or developing characters. If it sounds like there's no substance, then you're almost right. While there aren't any deep or recurring characters, the number of them helps keep things from getting boring. I'm pretty confident that the devs had a genuine interest in bugs and plants, so they wanted to have a diverse cast of creatures to make the world feel more vibrant. Smushi even has a journal that gives fungus facts about mushrooms around the world. Combine this with how most interactions are short, and you never feel like the game is grinding you down with excessive quirkiness. It doesn't waste your time. Areas are very pleasant to wander around and encourage you to roam, but keep everything close so it's hard to get lost. For example, if there's an area that could be divided into 5 sections, and each section has a puzzle or characters to talk to, you will almost never have to leave that section to complete whatever is there. So a puzzle in section 1 won't require you to look for something in the other sections. However, for those who value exploration, there are some rewards you can find if you pay close attention, and the rewards you get are simple but nice to have. And though the gameplay is simple, it's well put together. You can't necessarily turn your brain off, but you get as many tries as you want since you can't lose. Solving simple puzzles keeps things pretty fresh, and jumping around keeps your attention with all the little things you can find. Smushi's movement options give you just enough freedom to explore, but not so much that you'll get distracted going for crazy jumps or anything. I never felt like I was fighting with the camera or controls either. It is simple, but well made. Animations are cute and perhaps a bit stiff sometimes, but there's some good consideration for visual feedback I'd like to praise. Smushi's leaf glider decays as your stamina runs out, and since Smushi has a big smoosh cap on his head, he does a Naruto run when he sprints to make the animation more obvious. I have one nitpick that I think no one will care about except for me, and that's that all the characters feel like they were written by one person. By that I mean the cadence, the vocabulary, the tone, it all feels similar between characters. While they all have their own personalities, they all speak so similarly that they blend into each other quite a bit. If the laid-back character is surprised by something, they will sound like every other character that has been surprised. It's minor, especially for a game that isn't character-driven like this, but I felt it, so I wanted to bring it up. Oh, and before I forget, I played this game because my friend recommended it to me. I don't know why he recommended it to me, because he himself had not even played the game yet, but whatever, I'm glad he did. While I wouldn't recommend Smushi to people who are all about gameplay or deep stories, I know there's a market for people who just want a cuddly and fuzzy, warm and laid-back tale where people refer to as a little smoosh. If you're interested in that kind of thing, I would strongly recommend this game. If even I liked it, I think there are a lot of casual gamers that would love this. Do you remember a time when first-person shooter games weren't just popular, but were cutting edge? They pushed gaming tech forward with dynamic lighting, intelligent AI, beautiful graphics, and physics simulations. Think of games like Fear, Half-Life, and Crysis. These games were incredibly influential, and with Half-Life being so supportive of modding, aspiring game devs were able to dip their toes in and get a feeling for making their own first-person shooter. They may not have had the budget or programming knowledge to make the simulation part of these games come to life, but they were charming and could be just as immersive thanks to their unique flavor. Think of a game like Cry of Fear, a Half-Life mod that eventually became its own standalone game. It was scary, had an interesting story, and it played well too. I don't know if you'd call it a cult hit or just a hit, but that idea of indie games that were inspired by these immersive sim FPS type games is really nostalgic to me. Now, that's a very heavy burden to place on the team that made Red Alliance, but when I saw their game's trailer, I couldn't help but get excited. It had the Ragdolls, a car you could blast through barricades with. A horror element was thrown in. It was giving me the vibes, man. Now, I'm not evil. I don't plan on comparing Red Alliance to the games I mentioned previously, but just understand where I'm coming from. This is what made me want to play the game, and while I think this game oozes that small team charm, unfortunately there is one aspect of the game that I can't really make an excuse for. I'll go over the charm first. I feel like a bunch of guys got together and said it would be cool to make a game, so they did. And you can see it very clearly when it comes to things like the voice acting, animations, and the open approach level design of some areas. I don't know if I can explain it with words, so here are some clips.
Hey, put that down, now, or else I will shoot.
No, please, this isn't a weapon. This is just a...
Stupid bitch. I told him to put the gun down. What an idiot.
Holy shit, they shot him dead. They actually shot him.
They killed
You
him.
see now how cruel these people really are.
I do
They
see
don't
now.
give a shit about me. They just follow orders, almost like machines.
Still here, huh? Go to sleep.
You missed. You missed again.
Why don't you keep your threats to yourself and do your job?
Dr. Gray's voice is so cool.
What did I say about questioning my work? Stand back.
His microphone peaked.
Great.
There's something bad about this. I can just feel it.
You may not be officially dead yet, but as of now, you're dead to me.
What?
Soon after that, we will assault the labs and rescue any civilian who is still alive. We'll put an end to Dr. Gray's madness.
Yeah, let's kill Dr. Gray. He killed Stanko after all.
Hey! Wake up! I'm an old man!
Why are you... Some people may see things like wonky physics or unfiltered plosives as objective flaws, and you would be right. These things aren't good, but it's endearing. It's that homemade feel, like going to a local shop where the dim lights buzz and the owner's 14-year-old son is working the register. Yeah, it's not professional, but it's comforting and casual. Levels are generally linear, but lead to open areas that let you tackle enemies from multiple angles. For example, you find your way into a gated snow base and need to hit a few switches without being seen. You can tackle the order however you want, so there's freedom in how you solve the problem. You can even ignore the stealth and go guns blazing if you really want. Scripted events rarely happen in fights, which gives the enemies an odd sense of grounded realism. Music doesn't swell, there's no audio sting when you're spotted, the game is neutral, which helps with that immersive idea I mentioned before. It even has some fun physics involved with the enemy ragdolls and ability to pick up random items and throw them around. During scripted sequences, I would just chuck barrels out of windows while I listened, which is just fun. All that being said, there's that lingering negative that I said I can't let go of, and that is the enemy AI. It is abysmal. Once an enemy sees you, he'll run around randomly and laser you instantly if he sees you again. Ah, shit! Man, he really did hit me. Guy's evil. What? Oh, please, from behind? Really? What kind of man do you think I am? To mitigate this, enemy shots tend to barely hurt you, and enemies often drop health pickups. But that is a band-aid solution to a major scar. Like most shooters, you'll probably want to run for cover when an enemy sees you, but when you duck behind it, enemies track you through walls. So the instant you peek to find the enemy, you already take a few hits. Combine this with them running around so much and you'll be taking hits before you even know where the enemies are. It made me feel like I was gonna get shot no matter what. So instead of losing track of an enemy, I should just stand in the open like a maniac. It's better than playing the role of mole in Whack-A-Mole. It feels unfair, because the game's not programmed to let you lose aggro or change positions undetected. You could shoot at a guy through a doorway and crouch around an entire building and he will be aiming at you the entire time. Not to mention that if you're detected by a single enemy, every enemy in the area will immediately become aggressive, meaning every enemy is now perfectly aiming at you through the walls. But at the same time, enemies can flip and suddenly become incompetent. A single enemy will shoot 20 shots and miss every one. You can stand so close to certain enemies their guns clip through you so they can't shoot you. Enemies will stand perfectly still as you club them to death. I hate to say it, but this killed the game for me. It just goes to show how important enemy AI really is. And it also made me realize just how much I take enemy AI for granted. I mean, how do you even program a balanced losing target algorithm into an enemy? How many shots should an enemy hit if he empties his magazine? Does it depend on the distance? Should a shot hit immediately after you leave cover, or should he miss a few shots first? How close should enemies be to react to your gunshots? Where should enemies go if they want to reload? It's a lot to consider, and I don't think I ever really thought about it until I saw this example. All in all, it was a decent experience, but the charm couldn't carry me through to the end. It seems that the game's worst enemy ended up being the game's own enemies. I'm actually a huge fan of platformers. When a game gets movement right, I can really pour time into it because it just feels fun to control. I feel free to express myself through gameplay. I can jump and dash and flip in so many different ways, and there's an innate satisfaction to conquering a platforming challenge. It's like solving a puzzle. Combine that with the feeling of discovery, filling in a map as you roam the world and talk to its inhabitants, unlocking new areas and abilities that allow you to dive even deeper into the world, and you end up with a platforming-focused Metroidvania. Sounds like a great idea, which is probably why everybody makes them. That being said, I chose to play Sheepo because I thought its name was funny. Sheepo is about a little sheepo named Sheepo. Sheepo is a slave to the corporate machine and travels to different planets to collect eggs for the sake of preservation. So Sheepo lands on a bird planet that isn't doing so hot right now, and Sheepo is tasked to collect one egg from each animal on the planet. Think Noah's Ark, except instead of following the word of God, it's the word of your manager. And instead of an ark, it's a spaceship. And instead of gathering 2 of each animal so they can get busy, you knock them out, steal their children, and just clone them instead. Also known as a Sheepo. Sheepo has the ability to transform into any animal that he collects, so if he collects a bird egg and finds a bird flying around, he can transform into that bird for a short time. Since you have to collect 6 eggs, I'm sure you can see the potential here. Platforming challenges where you swap from one animal to the other, having to quickly adjust to the new ability and change gameplay styles to keep you on your toes. But Sheepo doesn't dive too much into that. Instead, it takes a concept like flying with the bird and squeezes out gameplay mostly in isolation. With the more free control power-ups like the skeleton worms, this can put you in some interesting scenarios, but for others like the slime, all you can do is roll against the wall, left or right. It feels like cohesion wasn't considered at all, leaving certain transformations feeling like an afterthought. That may sound somewhat damning, but it's not. The gameplay isn't bad, just a bit underutilized. The game controls very well, and interacting with the world feels responsive. The lesser power-ups appear less frequently, so you don't have to spend too much time suffering with the duller ones. And though the gameplay is simple, it does feel like it explores pretty much everything you can do with it for each power-up and Sheepo himself. The game is around 3 to 4 hours long, so nothing overstays its welcome. And YouTube may destroy the visuals here, but the art style is very pleasant to look at. The solid colors and gradients complement the simple environments, and it balances clarity and beauty really well. But when the visuals are paired with the soundtrack, that's when you can really start vibing. And I think that this is the best part of Sheepo, platforming through a pretty place, chill music, talking to some of the bird locals. It gives an otherworldly feeling. It's relaxing and engaging. But this also contributes to the worst part about Sheepo by far. When you pause the game, It pauses the music too, guys, come on! One thing I like about the dialogue in this game is that it tries to be somewhat quirky, but doesn't dwell on it too much. In Smushi Come Home, I felt like every character talked to me like I was a toddler, but in Sheepo, the quirk comes from each character's personality. Though I think the devs were banking on you getting endeared to the characters a little more than you probably will. You don't spend much time with any character, and they usually only have like 5 to 10 sentences max to say, which I like because this isn't really a story-focused game, but there are moments that seem to be like, remember the good times you had with that guy? And I'm like, who? Oh, the guy who said 4 lines about bones? Again, not a bad thing, just another case of the game perhaps not quite reaching the potential I think it wants to reach. One more small thing to complain about, and it's that navigating the world can sometimes be a bit dull due to backtracking. Now, you can teleport at select locations, which is great, but the issue is explicitly that there are a few points of no return where you hop in a room and can't go back the way you came. So if you take a wrong turn, you now have to navigate for a few minutes just to teleport back a few rooms. The first time through is fine, but it feels like an oversight that is worth mentioning. I think I'm sounding more negative than positive here, but I insist that these aren't glaring flaws by any means. My complaints are minor annoyances at most. I'm being critical of the game because I see a lot of potential. These issues keep the game from becoming a true hidden gem, sure, but it didn't prevent me from being enthralled by the music, the gameplay, the atmosphere. It feels odd to say that I was immersed in a game about a Sheepo, but the feeling I get when platforming to this music just can't be understated. Sheepo is very solid, very good, and I happily recommend it. I'm actually a fan of Oats, the developer of this game. After playing No Delivery, I was excited to try out his most recent release, Sorry We're Open. Sorry We're Open is a game about managing a supermarket. It's a bit hard to pin down a raw story for the game, but generally you go through work days to make cash, find employees, and receive rewards. Your store isn't fully open yet, so you, as manager, utilize your resources to open other parts of the store. And this sometimes involves visiting sister locations to obtain whatever you need. When I play a game by Oats, I'm usually in it for 2 main reasons: the atmosphere and the theming. There's this vibe that Sorry We're Open has where the world feels ominous. Music is reserved for fights, so most of the game is humming with ambient noise. Dialogue is nonchalant and timed casually, even though there seems to be something terrible around every corner. Your character will witness horrible creatures and mind-bending sights and just walk away without reacting. It's like everything is falling apart and no one cares. Surely these things are happening, right? I'm not just seeing things. This indifference that the game has to its own events ties into its theme of corporate greed and its readiness to dispose of anything that isn't profitable. Just as the world seems to be apathetic to the horror, the company is apathetic to its employees. A lesser game would endear you to a couple named employees and kill them off one by one in some scripted events. But Oats nailed the theme by randomly generating employees that you never learn about. Why would a manager need to learn about an employee's backstory? How does that help us meet our deadlines? If someone wants to join your party, you interview them and judge them explicitly on how they will support you. If the manager dies in battle, you lose, so firing employees to heal and save the manager's job will happen often. Better to lose a grunt of a cashier than a manager who keeps the business afloat. And if you lose an employee, just go hire a new one. The game has permadeath for your employees, so no picking favorites. If an employee dies, it's just an inconvenience. It's rare to find a game that synchronizes themes and gameplay to this extent. There are a lot of games that don't do this, and it makes their message feel hollow. Violence is bad, but shooting feels great. The moral choice is less lucrative, but here are bonus points for being a good boy. It takes a lot of work to make sure these things mesh, and the game is better for it. I've always been impressed by the dedication Oats has to having turn-based combat with no leveling system. Instead, combat tends to rely more on team composition and consumables. This usually means that once you start collecting enough items, you can effectively become invincible. But since you can't improve stats, you always feel vulnerable. One stroke of bad luck can place you 6 feet under. The one complaint I have is that the roguelite part of the game doesn't really have enough content to warrant its inclusion. Dialogue prompts and events repeat themselves often, and for a horror game, let's just say there's a distinct difference between this and this. The more exposure I get, the more accustomed to the content I become. Maybe the mindless droning is the point. When you work a job like this, not much happens. It drags on, it's boring. But when I leave my boring real-life job and play a game that starts feeling like a boring real-life job, whether it's intentional or not, I have to resist falling asleep while I collect my 30th expired energy bar that I found behind the shelves while restocking. It's harsh, but I genuinely think this drags the game down a lot. But the majority of important events happen outside of the roguelite sections, so there's still a lot of value to squeeze out of this game. Wandering the stores and finding horrors you don't really understand is a lot of fun, and while the writing is sometimes pretty on the nose, the game more than makes up for it with creative environments and bizarre situations. Oats has a number of other games on his itch.io page, one of which is free, so maybe try that one out and see if you vibe with his style. If you do, I don't think you could go wrong with any of his games.
Cement this concrete, baby!
Brutal Egg, what a name. Check out the description. If you like concrete, play it. Yeah, I guess I do. This game doesn't really have a story, but you find yourself in a brutalist concrete world and you have a weird gun in your hands. When you shoot the gun, it frazzles whatever's in front of you, showing you that the concrete you saw before may not really be there, or the opening is actually blocked off, or someone graffitied a slideshow of a running deer on the wall. You are also completely deaf until you fire the gun, and since there are no instructions at the start, I thought the game was bugged. The game looks quite nice, and even though you're swamped in gray, it stays interesting thanks to the scale of the assets. The level design isn't very complex or anything, but walking around and looking at the bizarre structures has its charm. The gameplay basically boils down to just firing the gun constantly at everything. Just look around until you see the next platform, just stare at cement until you find a button. The gun has no ammo and lasts a long time before going on a short cooldown. But with few enemies and no immediate platforming danger, there's nothing stopping you from just standing still for a second. The game never really explores what you can do with such a weird mechanic, but at the same time it wasn't something I had ever seen before. There was one part that was conceptually interesting, where a giant wall of death would kill you if you didn't hide off to the side, and the only way to know it was coming was to listen to sound cues, which you need to fire the gun for. Cool idea, but again, there's no reason not to just tape down the shoot button. And you're using the sight granted by the gun to see where you're jumping already, so you'll never miss the audio cue. Because of its novelty, toying around with ways you could use this mechanic is pretty fun, and I think you could create some pretty interesting gameplay scenarios, just not with how the game currently works. A simple change would be to split the hearing and seeing into separate guns, then try to put you in situations where lacking either sense would feel like a detriment. If you remember that death wall I mentioned before, if it was changed from happening at regular intervals to more random intervals, this would force you to go deaf while you platform, but you would have to nervously switch back to hear the wall coming. Stopping to listen would let you know it's coming, but could also make you stand still for too long and risk getting hit. So players could either try to play it safe with short bouts of platforming and frequent hiding, or they could try to fire ahead and memorize where to jump, which would let them listen for longer. It's also interesting to think about how enemies could be used with distinct guns as well. Imagine an enemy that you could hear running around with a sound gun, but he was invisible, and to kill him you'd need to fire the sight gun. If the audio cues were good enough, you could get an idea of where they are and try to pre-aim, but if you were wrong, you'd have to scramble to find the enemy before it reaches you. Some of these ideas would be pretty hard to implement though. The enemies would probably need pretty complex AI to make fighting them more interesting. But this is the first game this dev has ever made, and it's free, so like I said before, this is a strong step forward. And this kind of thing is the whole reason I like playing unknown indie games. Surprise me, intrigue me, call me, beat me if you want to reach me. I can't read Japanese, but it seems like they're already hard at work on their next game, so keep up the good work. I had fun with it, though it's definitely very amateurish, but that's to be expected when it's pretty much a first try. They call her Suzy Cube, but where the devs see a cube, I only see curves. Look, I'm not a racist or anything, but I don't really play mobile games. I'm a red-blooded American patriot. At birth, I was fed a balanced diet of hot dogs, SpaghettiOs, and microplastics. I need not leave my chair because I cannot bear the weight of my own weight. Are you telling me that when you spend 400 USD to collect your Milky Muse, you do this while walking in public? If you said yes, I don't believe you. The only reason we know that Schrodinger's mobile gamer is actually alive is because the loan sharks must be getting these kidneys from somewhere. It hurts me when you lie, mobile gamer. It hurts us. So I don't understand why I would ever buy a game for my phone when I could just play a better one on my PC. Which is why I was curious about Suzy Cube, a platformer that isn't just trying to ruthlessly shake shekels out of my pockets after an initial buy, gave me some hope that there might be a mobile game out there that doesn't feel like a waste of time. And hey, the PC port of the game had some pretty positive reviews, so maybe my life as a bigot will finally come to an end. The game controls well. I never really missed a jump or felt like I got hit unfairly. It's all pretty tight. The mobile platform limitations do sometimes bleed through, however, and it doesn't feel great when you notice it. Oh, that's weird. So I'm gonna hold left on my controller, right? See, I'm running exactly left, and here I'm running exactly right. Now if I run down a little bit to here, and now I hold exactly left, it centers me on the platform. Like making this turn by just holding right is weird. Well, if that's already 2 of the stars, there's probably only 1 more, meaning, oh shit. Okay, that was, the hold right mechanic stopped working for a second. But this is a minor complaint. It does feel good, and that was surprising. I thought mobile games would always feel cheap. However, while I can only speculate, the main issue with the game may still come from its position as a mobile game, so let me explain. With how simple controls need to be to allow for players to use a touchscreen, this means that controlling Suzy alone is very, very simple. You can move, you can jump, and you can use some basic power-ups. If it was made with just a controller in mind, then you have so many buttons and so much precision that you can do so many more things. But since Suzy controls in a very plain way, the game needs to depend almost entirely on its levels to hold your interest. And this is a really dangerous way to design your game. Think of something like Mario, right? If you isolated Mario in a void, you could still hop around and have some amount of fun with it because he has so many movement options. So if a level ends up being boring in a Mario game, you can at least fall back to the simple appeal of controlling the character. But in something like Suzy Cube, if a gimmick fails to be engaging, there is nothing to fall back on. Because of this, there's a point at the end of the second world where you kinda just get slapped by disappointment and the game never recovers. So here's the boss of World 2, right? You climb a tower while a rising death floor of sand chases you, and when you get to the top, a big dragon bursts out of the sand and starts attacking with a couple simple patterns. It's alright as far as a boss goes, I guess, but here's the boss of World 1. You climb a tower while a rising death floor of water chases you, and when you get to the top, a big dragon bursts out of the water and starts attacking with a couple simple patterns. You want to take a swing at what the third boss is? I don't know if they did this because of some budget or size limitation or something, but it is brutal to accept, and sort of poisons everything else afterwards. So after the second dragon, each level gimmick doesn't just have to be good enough to compensate for the limited gameplay, but it also needs to repair the relationship with the player, because they need something to look forward to. The tragic thing is that I don't think this is all because the developers are mediocre or anything. I think the platform just doesn't allow for complex games to be made. Maybe this is just my lack of mobile game experience, and if you know of a good mobile game that uses touch controls specifically, not a controller, let me know. But it's like watching women's sports. It's cool to see what they can do, but why limit myself to mediocre performance? I think I'll stick with the men, ladies, and I ain't saying no homo. I think if this team made another game for another platform, they could probably do something pretty cool. But as it stands, Suzy Cube is pretty rough around the edges. Hey guys, have you ever died and gone to hell? I have, and it is really fun. Mortal Sin is cool, man. It's just cool. It may not be the best proof, but to prep for this video, I wanted to record 4 hours of footage and ended up with 13. I was curious about this game because of its striking visuals, and I'm sure YouTube is going to send this footage to the bitrate shadow realm, but trust me that it looks super rad. It's got that heavy shadow kind of style you'd see in something like Hellboy, and it's one of the few games where the film grain is actually appealing to look at since it's done for style instead of realism. The dev knew the style was a selling point and leaned into it with unlockable color filters. You have interesting choices, such as blue and red and blue, Halloween, Fang Stock. The art style, even with all its effects, doesn't interfere with the clarity of the gameplay. Enemies, pickups, backgrounds, they're all color-coded, so you should have no problem zipping through levels faster than I fly through school zones. And let me tell you, that's quite the achievement. The clarity allows the gameplay to move quickly, and once you get used to how the game works, you can move into that flow state where you just can't put the game down. You can parry, you can block, you can kick, you can bash, you can swing, and you can charge attacks. And when strung together, you can unleash devastating floor-clearing combos. Since the game is a roguelike, there are tons of skills, power-ups, weapons, and classes that make some of these combos work better than others, and finding a way to sneak a combo in becomes an interesting challenge. A strong example is the slow but powerful Berserker, who has the ability to become invincible while he rotates. Since he's slow, the simplest way to start spinning, by charging your basic attack fully, leaves you super vulnerable. So comboing into a spin with something like a kick, bash, attack, bash, kick, bash, attack lets you press the attack while allowing you to transition into a spin instantly.
Kick, punch, stab, punch, kick, punch, spin.
And while I know that combo sounded complex to you pathetic non-fighting game nerds, each combo has a purpose. You do the combo I mentioned to cash out on the instant whirlwind, but there are combos that result in things like a ranged poke that may suit your needs better. You can focus on just a few at a time, so memorization isn't really needed. There are a ton of classes to keep the gameplay varied, and usually it involves a specific weapon type and innate skill combo. You can play as the Reaper if you love spinning, pick the
Paladin
if you want to focus on blocking and parrying. If you've ever held down the delete key in a big text document and thought, wow, that was really fun, pick the Mage.
Prayer is for the foolish, quaint, and soon to be dead, and heaven forbid the day.
The most unique mechanic in this game is probably the hit lag. When you land an attack on an enemy, the game will slow down for impact, but you can still aim normally. So with your weapon extended, you can move during the slow motion to hit another enemy, which extends the hit lag further. This has you constantly wiggling your camera around to maximize damage, and while that sounds like it could be annoying, it adds to the frenetic feeling that the game is banking on. And when you do land a single big attack on a horde of enemies, it feels really good. The worst thing about this game is probably that I wish there was more of it. The game is in early access and receives updates regularly, but at the moment I do feel like something is missing. I'm just not sure what it would actually need to add. Maybe a bit more variety in layouts, enemy gimmicks, or non-enemy challenges. But this is a somewhat minor complaint. The updates so far have been consistent improvements, so I have little doubt that it'll be figured out soon enough. One thing you'll probably notice is that the enemies are all very similar. Not in design, but mechanically. They're never really too complex, but this isn't what the game is going for. The complexity comes from managing swarms of enemies and positioning yourself in a way that keeps you from being overrun. I thought this was a negative at first, but I've come to appreciate it as I played more of the game. It's focused on giving you a ton of tools and asking that you respond in the way that you think is best according to your build or your personal preference. Maybe your weapon has a skill that does AoE damage when you successfully parry, or maybe you use bashes for mobility and quickly combo from a bash to a ranged jab. I found myself gravitating towards spinning and playing aggressively, so I tried to dash into an enemy's face and combo into a spin, but if I got attacked during my combo, I had to cancel it to block and had to start over. Regardless of your build, you can never fully turn your brain off, even when you hit that flow, unless you're the mage, of course. Of all the games on this list, this is the one I'm most confident about recommending. It is fun, super fun. It is in early access, yes, but again, the updates so far have all been genuine improvements. If you don't try this game, now that's the real mortal sin. And that means you're going to hell, and I'm gonna send you there. Bang, 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 bang. Stardrop is a pretty good game. It follows the player character, Erin Vance, and her partner, John Kindley. They're a team that takes their ship out to space to salvage ships and rescue people who are still on board. They get notified of a case regarding an unknown vessel, and since it didn't respond to any requests to open comms, it's considered to be just an ordinary salvaging operation. John figures the ship is abandoned, probably, but mentions that there have been no reports of any missing ships that haven't already been accounted for. That's odd, but you have a job to do, so you fly out to the ship to investigate. Your goal is to make it to the bridge, which is where you can extract data to identify the ship. As you find scattered logs and read emails, it seems that someone or something on the ship was malicious. There are reports of Android AI being tampered with, passwords being randomly changed, all minor things, but it's nothing the crew could ignore. As you read about the crew diving into its search for the culprit, you begin to wonder. There aren't any signs of struggle. The ship's systems are all still functional, so where did the crew go? Where did the ship come from? And thus, the mystery begins. I don't want to get too into the story because this game is almost all story, and I don't want to ruin it. It's a walkie-talkie kind of game, and the gameplay is really just a vehicle to move the plot forward. But I will say the story is good. It's hard to sell a mystery without giving away some details, so I'd recommend getting cozy and trying the game out yourself. It's heartfelt, the twists and turns are not very obvious thanks to some well-integrated feints, and yes, I even teared up at one point. Though how much of that is thanks to the superb soundtrack, only God knows. I'd say there are 2 storytelling critiques I would give though, and these critiques are mostly so you know what to expect if you decide to play the game. The first is that there probably should have been a stronger hook at the start of the game. The mystery element only starts up maybe 30 minutes into the game, and even then it's very light. Because you know nothing of the ship or the crew, and the main characters have no personal investment in the ship initially, it's hard to feel involved. My second critique is that the emails and logs are efficient in delivering exposition, but lack character. Every email is impersonal, like a business email. While realistic, it means there isn't much to sink my teeth into outside of getting a passcode, seeing some people say, "What is going on?" and only the occasional revelation. Adjusting writing styles per character would go a long way in making me care more about the missing crew. These 2 things combine to make the first chapter feel not bad, but more, alright. I think it finds its footing in chapter 2, and the story from there does take its time, but it was completely engaging from then on. I recommend this game if you're into story-heavy walking simulators, but just be aware of this slow start before you begin and trust that it is worth your time. All that being said, I actually chose this game for its visuals. I hadn't played many indie games that were made in Unreal Engine, so I wanted to see what the engine could offer. And the game looks very good. Some lighting issues and a few sharp texture transitions aside, the environments are very pleasing to the eye. It depends on a lot of post-processing effects, but they're done for the sake of immersion more than anything. So no chromatic aberration or film grain or any dumb stuff like that. In terms of gameplay, there's really not much to say, but I will say that you'll want to change your walk speed to fast, and that the game soft locked on me twice, meaning I could still move around and stuff, but an elevator was in the wrong place or a camera change wouldn't trigger, so I was stuck. Restarting the game resolved the issue both times. Scattered amongst the logs of Stardrop are developer logs, which is pretty cool. When I was a kid, I thought developer rooms and commentaries were boring and I'd avoid them like the plague, but now that I'm older, I can appreciate getting some insight about how games are made. Reading about the considerations Jor made when making each level is very interesting. He might discuss how he tried coloring sections of the ship differently to keep players from getting lost and to add some character to the ship itself. He talks about his concerns over living up to the levels he had already developed, and his thought process about reducing narrative and gameplay monotony. At one point, he explains why he designed a part of the ship the way he did, stating that he wanted something non-derivative and took inspiration from biological creatures. It turns out that Jor wasn't in a great financial point in his life when putting this game together. His budget came out to $500, but he was passionate. He had a story that needed to be told, and in his Stardrop production report, which you can find as an Easter egg in-game, he explains his inspirations. This could be something like how he thought Alien Isolation was cool, but being hunted all the time didn't let him fully appreciate the beautiful spaceship, so he wanted a game where you could take your time. He talks about how he wanted the main character's name to be Sarah, but he thought the voice actor's name, Erin, made for a cooler name, and just asked her if he could use her name in-game. And in the call where this discussion was taking place, every once in a while you can hear his daughter talk or laugh in the background. It's just wholesome. But my main takeaway was that there was some guy who had an idea for a game, and despite all the challenges he faced, he persevered and made something that he could be proud of. And he should be proud of it. I touched on this in my Ninnin section, but this straight from the heart type of development is what I love so dearly about indie games. People pouring their everything into a piece of work to try and make something beautiful, and it is beautiful. The joy of creating without caring for financial success, making something just because you want to make it. It's something admirable, maybe even inspirational. I think a lot of people, myself included, get intimidated by all the barricades that are in the way of our dreams. Even though I only have 4 videos on my channel, somehow I still got disillusioned and threw out 3 scripts because I focused too heavily on what I needed to do to attract an audience. Superficial concerns froze me in place for a while, and it was easy to point my finger at excuses, like not having enough time or not having the budget. But in reality, I should have done what Jor did, what all these indie devs did, and just nut up and keep working. For me, I needed to focus on making things I liked and stop trying so hard to appeal to my potential new audience that didn't exist yet. It makes sense that my first video is my most popular. It's the one that had the most passion put into it. I think passion shines through, whether it be for a video on YouTube or a game I found randomly on Steam. While I still have a long way to go to improve myself and achieve my goals, Seeing others accomplish their own, it tells me that I can do it too. I appreciate Jor being so open about the development of his game. I said before that Stardrop is pretty good, but it's special to me thanks to the logs he left for me to find. In the production report, some text appears on screen while Jor and the voice actors are being interviewed. Through all the tough times, we held our heads high, stayed true to ourselves, and remained passionate. As we worked our butts off and gave many a sigh, we hope that this experience you will never forget. And I want Jor to know that I don't plan on forgetting Stardrop. It simply means too much to me. Hey, it's me, Jompo. I hope you liked my video, fellas. Some of the games like Ninnin and Mortal Sin have updated since I put their sections together, so go check those out. And just to be clear, I enjoyed my time with every game on this list, regardless of whether I recommended it or not. So take a peek at these for yourselves, and also take a peek at my streaming channel, Consume Jompo. I have some highlights there that you can check out, and of course, I have videos here as well. Remember to like and subscribe for more cool things like this. I won't leave you hanging for too long next time. Anyway, have a good one. It's actually really hard.